Welcome to the Church Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Don Hicks. The focus of this podcast is to provide coaching, equipping, and strengthening of church leaders who will lead and equip the believers for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. This will enable healthy leaders and healthy churches to flourish and thrive as they carry out the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, in the power of the Holy Spirit. Welcome to this episode of Church Leadership in Focus. I'm your host, Don Hicks, and today we have a guest that I have known since 1988, Dr. John Vaughn. Let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. Vaughn. His experience, he's owner and founder of Church Growth Today, International Megachurch Research Center for Church Growth, 40 years and 9 months. His education is Fuller Theological Seminary in California, where he got a D-Min doctorate in church growth. He graduated from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, University of Memphis, and Union University. Now his specialty, you ready for this? Megachurches, U.S. and global largest and fastest growing churches of all sizes since 1980. You are going to enjoy our conversation that we have with John today. He's written many, many books. Just some of the ones that I pulled out: World's 20 Largest Churches, America's Most Influential Churches, The Large Church. In fact, I read that plane to the first large church I became pastor at on the plane to try to get some bearings on that. Mega churches in American cities, and other books that we'll have on his bio sheet at the end of this podcast today. And I encourage you to find these books and to read them as well. American Society for Church Growth, past president, founding editor, renamed to the Great Commission Research Fellowship, 2007 recipient of the Donald McGavran Outstanding Leadership in Church Growth Award, National Association of Church Business Administrators, president of the Metro Memphis, Tennessee chapter. We're going to have a great time just talking with Dr. Vaughn today. These are going to be 3 different podcasts, and I encourage you to listen to them. John, it's great to have you with us today.
It's great to be with you, Don. Let's go for it, brother.
Okay. I like that. I called John yesterday, and he goes, "Hey, Don, how things going?" My wife always tells me this, John. You cannot talk to somebody for years, pick up the phone, and you guys are like best friends again.
Yes, you can.
And remember the story that you told me when we first met? I invited you to the church that I was pastoring. Why don't you share a little bit about that?
Don had invited me to his church. They had just gone to second services. They had a group meeting in the gym and a group meeting in the auditorium. And I was preaching in the auditorium. And before the service, I had sort of circulated. There's a lady in the back, a nurse. She hadn't been in church in years. This was her first Sunday back in church. And so the service began, and I was just talking about growing churches, and this lady stands up in the middle of the auditorium and shouts, "He told you to say that." And I said, "Excuse me?" I didn't know they were getting ready to have a business meeting, you understand, next week or something about whether to have second service or not. But I mean, she totally traumatized the entire congregation. And I thought, my immediate thought was that poor nurse and those like her on the back seat that had been out of church. They were in church for the first Sunday. And here was this nutcake, absolutely just representing Satan at his best, you know. But it is one of the most memorable events. Probably the second most memorable event was when I was in a small country church and all the lights went out. So everybody parked their cars around the church building and turned the headlights on. But that day with Don, I felt so sorry for him and for the people. But I saw Satan in full display, and it just made you know that we're fighting a battle and a warfare against the enemy that is he's been at it a lot longer than we've been, and so if we're not ready, if our armor's not on us and we're not equipped and ready for it, we'll be caught totally off guard. But I don't think we were caught off guard at all.
Well, John, uh, Adrian Rogers, he's with the Lord now, but he was at Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis.
We used to have pastors' conference every Monday in his church. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, he did my ordination to the gospel ministry, and I was nervous about it because I was going to go back to Nashville and have it done there. And my wife said, "Well, you work for Adrian Rogers here as an intern. Why not ask him to do it?" Honey, he doesn't have time for me.
I got that right, bro. That's smart. That's good.
And guess what?
Doesn't get any better than that.
She called his secretary and told her, Don needs to be ordained. Well, Adrian would be happy to do that. Well, he's trying to go back to Nashville. Well, that's nonsense. So I get a call from Dr. Rogers' secretary saying that an appointment is set for me to come in and talk about Dr. Rogers ordaining me to the ministry. And I was just beside myself, okay? But it turned out to be great. And, one thing that made me nervous is that my parents were there. 100 of the people that he invited and put in the VIP section right up front there. And the ordination council met 1.5 hours before I was to be ordained, and 5,000 people sitting
some
there.
Kind of council.
and so my dad, I introduced my dad to Dr. Ryan and said, "Floyd, you know him better than anybody. Why don't you just come be on the ordination council and you can ask him some questions?" So there I was in this conference room with 7 of Bellevue's pastors, and my dad sitting on my right and Adrian Rogers sitting on my left. And I was like, okay, there's no chance for me to get out of here. And he said, "Don, just relax. You would have never become a intern here had we not already vetted you. You're sitting here today for us to affirm you into ministry." And so we went around the table, and each person gave me a piece of advice, and it was so affirming. But in that sermon that he preached from 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, what it means to suffer in the ministry. I was wearing a boot on my left foot from an ankle surgery during that time. And here's what he said. He said, he looked at me and he said, "Everybody else can listen, but Don, this is for you, Don Hicks." He said, "I pray that God will allow tribulation, problems, conflict to enter your life, that you might know the comfort of God where you can comfort others." And it's like, wow. I thought, I don't know if that was a curse or if what it was, but you know what?
It was a blessed curse.
Well, I found out my entire ministry was filled with that, just like what you experienced. Every church, it was like every church that I pastored grew exponentially. But there was always some type of satanic attack or a person attack or a nurse standing up, saying things. And if I would have been a little bit more witty at that time, I would have said, "Look, I didn't say anything to him. He's not an evangelist. That's who you talk to tell the people what they want to hear." Okay. But it's amazing how God used all that to launch my ministry as well. And
I'm glad that Adrian was in your life. He of all the God's champions, he has got to be among the very, very, very best. And what you saw is what you got. And he was not a man you'd want him. You'd want him on your side. You would not want him as your enemy.
Right. And I, he was the same way in and out of the pulpit. And
That's right.
We had a lifetime relationship that I have with his wife now, Joyce, and his sons. It's been really a neat experience over the years. But I tell you, when because I was always interested in church growth, and that's why I enjoyed your fellowship so much. And we're going to
Now,
talk a little.
when were you an intern at Bellevue?
That would have been, let's see, 70. Let me think here.
Early 70s or middle 70s?
Yeah, let's see. I got married in 79, 81, probably 80, 88.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was already away from Memphis by then. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so
You're a very blessed man to have had that relationship with him.
well, I want to tell you something. It's been a wonderful experience, and I never got tired of listening to his sermons. I went to the
Never,
8 o'clock.
never.
I went to all three morning services, Sunday evening, Wednesday, the Monday meeting you're talking about, and then the Thursday men's meeting. And I always took notes. And one day he
Hmm.
told me, "Sit down. What are you taking so many notes for? I mean, why don't you just? I can just email you all my sermons, okay? You don't have to take."
Stop the same. This is real time.
Yeah, but I studied him, the way he presented himself, how he always was so gracious, and what an experience. And I can't wait to see him one day in heaven. But
Yeah,
something that you blessed me with are the books that you wrote, and then you graciously coming, and you were a busy guy, coming and to two of the churches that I pastored, and one of them you gave out fruit. Remember that?
yep, yep.
Yep,
Grapes and grapefruit.
yep. So anyway, tell me a little bit about your family, John.
I grew up in Memphis. Went to Catholic schools early, first, second, third grade. Almost converted. I had my little altar and I had my rosary, and we heard a lot of saint stories. And I was praying God make me at least so I could be a saint, and He answered the question. But they took me out, and then I went to public school. Went back my sophomore year to Christian Brothers, which is there are two Catholic schools in Memphis, Catholic High, which is inner city, and then Christian Brothers is out with. The top two engineering schools in Tennessee were Vanderbilt and Christian Brothers. Christian Brothers had a high
Yes.
school department, and that's where I went to high school. So I had the best of my teachers there, and so it was there that God called me to preach. I was in the Berkeley Church there in Memphis, and out on the east side of the city, and went to Union a couple of years. My dad was a welfare international harvester, worked about 3 jobs, supporting us 4 kids.
Mm.
He ran out of money sending me to Union, so I finished at the University of Memphis, which was Memphis State then, in sociology and history, and then went to Southwestern. I looked at all the seminaries were equidistant from where I lived there in the city, and but we had family. Dr. Curtis Vaughn was a distinguished professor of Greek and New Testament at Southwestern for 30 years
Yes.
there.
Yes, I know of
And
him.
and I always wanted to be. He's a very gentle, very literate kind of a man, a real gentleman. And I always wanted to be in church growth, what he was in Greek and New Testament. And finished there. Funny thing was in our graduation there, we were in the library headed for the auditorium. Guy behind me said, "Boy," I said, "I'm just glad to get out of here." I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, I said, we were in the library. I said, "Do you realize we left 90+% of our education in this one room right here?
Mm.
If we just knew what was on one shelf, we'd have a doctoral degree in whatever topic it'd be in. And we had the largest theological library in the world right there. And we just left so much behind us. And so from Southwestern, and before I went to Southwestern, when I was back in Memphis, the church I grew up in was, we started out clearing out beer cans on Saturday night at a VFW, and then we moved a block away. and it was church rent about 1,000. And then went to Union. Well, my first church was when I came back to Memphis. I was working on the staff there, and my first church was about 2 people out in open country in Cochran, Mississippi. Okay, it was a mission church, of a church up the road, and I had more bumblebees than I had people, and half the county was on peace bond, which meant that they were dangerous people.
Yeah.
One Christmas weekend, I was setting up a projector, and we had a rented house from a Methodist lady, and they had all these bumblebees in it. And but most of my people were sharecroppers, and they were just working for other people, but they were good people. And I was setting up this movie projector, and these 2 guys, the Yan brothers. The
Uh,
Yan brothers come up, and they're just standing there. Thankfully, I had my wife to be there with me, but they just stood there in the door, didn't say a word. And then after a minute or two, they walked away. But I found they come to beat me up.
oh, wow.
And I said, "Thank you, Lord, for my wife to be." But then I went to seminary, and then was with the Westridge Baptist Church. Westridge was in Euless, between Dallas Fort Worth, and the pastor there was John Hopper. John spoke Spanish fluently, and he's from Louisiana. Later became president of the Baptist Seminary in Roussillon, Switzerland. But that was just an amazing time of my life. We had great deacons, great people, and then from there went to. I always told God, everybody in seminary want to go back to God's country, wherever they came from.
Yeah.
And I always told the Lord, Lord, I'll go to 10th Church Hell if that's where you want me, because I don't want to be anywhere you don't want me to be. But it turned out one day I was working for a testing lab there in Fort Worth, and we had really a dirty job. We worked for a plastics engineer, and we were coating like 20-foot joints of steel pipe, and we would shoot chemicals in there, and then wrap them in tar, and then wrap them. We ship them off to the pipe oil lines up in Alaska. And one day a guy called and he says, "Dick," this guy was an engineer. He says, "Dick," he said, "you haven't called us lately for Texas employment." And he says, "Well, let me tell you," he said, "I've had 50-year guys," and he says, "I don't know if they'll show up drunk, or if they even show up on Monday morning." He said, "I got 5 guys from the Baptist Seminary over here." And he says, "These guys are really strange." He says, "Presbyterian brother." And he said, "These guys are really different." He says, "They tell me they don't work for me." He says, "They work for God, and I just pay the salary." And he says, "I get more, I get more work out of them than I did out of your 50 guys that came and went. So when you can send the guys like that," he said, "I'll call you back." So, but one day I got a call from the vice president of the seminary, John Seelig, and he said, "There's somebody here I want you to meet." And there's a guy named J.C. Mitchell. J.C. was pastor of Hunter Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, who would later be at the First Baptist in Winter Park, Florida, become president of the convention there. But so when I came in, there were just these 2 men, John Seelig and John Mitchell. Well, so John's sitting there like a horny toad, just sort of very stoic and very, unapproachable kind of a guy. And so this is the guy he wants me to meet. I plan on going to Pennsylvania to start a church. And so he said, "I'm looking for staff," and he says he's trying to really make it look bad. He says, "Now, if you come to my church, he said, we're going on television." He said, "But you're going to be probably, I have a lot of funerals in my church. I'll expect you to work no less than 50 hours a week, make so many visits." Well, he just lighting my fire. He thought he was putting
Yeah.
me, but I mean, it was just, I said, "Thank you, Lord."
So you became an expert in funerals, right?
Oh, my first Sunday, buddy. People just didn't die in my family. But when I was in seminary, I was the chaplain intern to Michael DeBakey, which is one of the top 3 guys in the world for heart plant. They were developing the heart valves and all that kind of thing back then. People come in, say, fix us, but they're usually too late. There was just early in the days of the technology. So, I mean, a lot of people died, while we were there. But but my first Sunday, there was a family had a suicide, and that was my funeral.
Mm.
So we went on Sunday TV that Sunday, and that was my first funeral as a suicide. So went to the funeral home, and there was a lady there, Goldie Lashman from Houston. She and I were the only ones at the funeral, but we became very, very good friends. And it was her brother that had died, and so she would my kid's birthday, she sent him a silver dollar, and we just stayed in contact. We sent her flowers, and then finally she died, and we just lost contact. And then a missionary in our church from Thailand came to Johnny's church I saw up in Iowa. He said, I want you to pray about it. It's for University Church in Iowa City, Iowa. Well, that was the hotbed. That was like Berkeley, Mid-America.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you.
I mean, shop owners had guns under their counter. Buildings were being burned. Um, and half of my congregation were grad students, and I actually had a ticket. So I said, okay, I'll go and I will talk to these people. I felt led to go, but I had a ticket because our church was connected with Pennsylvania. So I had a ticket to fly to State College and then also to Iowa City. But Iowa City was the first stop. Worst ice storm in 50 years. But we went there, and I told my wife, I said, I think we'd better go back to Birmingham and pray and get a yes or no about Iowa City before we use this other half of the ticket, just like, when you're calling a pastor.
Right.
And so that's where God called us. And we had a large bus ministry there, and had some amazing people there. And then one day, I wanted we had a bus ministry, so I wanted to go back to Memphis to see. I'd heard about a bus ministry at Trinity Baptist Church, so I'd gone back to Memphis, and they had about 8 buses, and they were about 8 blocks from where Elvis lives, and the area was changing from white to black. And but so in that meeting, he and I met. He said, "I'd like to come to Iowa City. He says to have a revival for your church. He says, we'll bring our people. We'll pay all the expenses. We'll have Bible clubs in the daytime, vacation Bible school in the daytime. We'll have a revival at night." And I said, "Great deal." So Billy Smith came up, and we had a great week. And the weekend, he said, "I want you to come and be on my staff." And I said, "Well," I said, God has me where He wants me right now. I just don't feel like this. I want to leave." He says, "Well," he says, "I want you to pray about it." And he says, "And I'll wait." He says, "God will tell you." And when He does, he says, "The position will be available for you." So, about a year later, uh, I went and I went to Memphis, and I'd already made a promise to God. Lord, I will go to 10th Church Hell if that's where you want me, because I don't feel like I have to go back where I came from. That's where my folks were, my family was. But He did call me there. We had a great ministry there, and then while I was there, a guy came to me named uh, Wayne Allen. Wayne was across town at Briarcrest Church. They had the largest Christian school in the country. And we also had a large Christian school where we were. But they were like, 3 blocks from my height. They were really upscale. University of Memphis School was all out there. Lausanne Girls School for Girls, all that was out there. And this was a gravy in the grass kind of church. I mean, they used to be on the west side of where the Hyatt is, and that was just an average middle America kind of a community. He was this was in the late '60s that he came there,
Yeah.
and so the Jesus People movement was big. And so here was a church. I mean, they were meeting outside. It wasn't really a big church, but man, they just filled the lawn out there. People were coming. And then they bought this property over next to the Hyatt, and that's where they began their school. And they had satellite locations and everything. And so I worked with Wayne. Wayne came to me in fact, at the Bellevue meeting one time, well, on Monday. He said, "John, I want you to come in and work on my staff." He says, "I'd be his number 2." He says, he was a
Yeah.
large guy,
Yeah.
just big built, not fat, just, big bones and all. And he was probably 3 maybe. And but he says people are intimidated by me, and he says, and they tell me what I want to know rather than what I need to know. And he says, I need somebody who'll tell me what I need to know. And he said, I want you to come and work with me. So he and I worked together for about 3 or 4 years. We were getting ready to go out. We'd been out visiting. We came back and we were practicing for a basketball game for we're going to play our youth for a big event. And he had a heart attack, and he was laying out on the bench there. And so he died like 6 months later. But before all that, just before all that happened, um, uh, there's Charles Cheney came down from Southwest Baptist University in here in Missouri, and they were wanting to endow a chair for
Oh,
church. But they
okay.
were actually coming to ask Wayne to be their president, and that's why he was there. So Wayne called me in, and
Yeah.
during that time, Rick Warren was heading out to California, and Rick wanted the blueprint for our building. So he said, he called me and said, here's somebody I want you to meet. And it was Rick. And we had, I mean, he didn't know me and I didn't know him. And in fact, most
Right.
people,
Right.
this is all before anybody knew anybody. So we gave him the plan. And but Charles Cheney came down. He used to be director for church planting and for Illinois Convention. And he said, we're endowing $1 million chair at SBU in church growth. And he said, we'd like you to come to fill that position. So I went, and so I was there for about 10 years. Very good experience. God was very, very good to me. And during those days, we had 2020 come and 60 Minutes come, and just all crazy things happened. We conducted the first census of independent churches in the U.S. for nearly in the past 50 years. We had denominational data, but no independent data. So I joined the American Association of Statisticians, and so we put together a room. We had a bank of phones. We had our students all there. And so for a year, we called churches all over America to get information on independent churches. And so that was the first census for that. And then that's
Yeah.
where
In
you and I
fact,
met. I mean, I was during
I
that time
went
that you and I met.
to Mid-America Seminary, and Steve Wilkes, remember him? Yeah, Steve went to be with the Lord a couple of years
Oh, yeah.
ago,
Oh, yeah.
but he really believed in me, and he made me his grader. And so, yeah, and
That's
that's
how
why I
God
read a
works,
lot of your books and begin to be influenced by the things that you have written. And Steve went on to invite me back uh, several years later to do, because he called me. He said, "You're the church conflict guy," and I said, "Steve, I don't like how you say that. Uh, you know, you know, I know the
That's an
playbook
important
so
position,
well
though,
about
brother.
church conflict. I can get a
Yeah.
conflict going if I, need some work. But it's interesting. He had me come back. It's like, so I took all his courses on church growth and things, and that's where I just fell in love with that. But what was interesting about Steve, uh, several years later, he invited me to come to a church growth conference and be a speaker. And I said, "What do you want me to speak on?" He goes, "I want you to speak on the effect of church conflict on church growth." I said, "I can do that." So Elmer Towns was there, and we're
That's
going to
right.
talk about him a little bit more in our next broadcast and your relationship with him. But he goes, "Don, this is wonderful that you're here, talking about this." And he's really tuned in. And later on, I ended up going to Liberty and having him as my key professor in my doctorate program. And, so he's still my friend to today. I think Elmer's about 93 now, but he's still got a sharp mind, still teaching his pastor's Sunday school class at Thomas Road. And but it's interesting of all the ways in which God weaves into our journey people that he wants us to meet that later on can be a blessing and an encouragement
Yeah.
in the different ministries that we do. Now, tell me a little bit about your wife.
And that leads
Yes.
back to your wife's comment. God, when He builds those relationships, you can all. It doesn't. Time means really nothing. You pick up. It's just like it was yesterday when you pick
Yes,
up and
and
you go
and
on
it's
where you were.
amazing. I think I'm 68 now, and I feel more energetic now than I did when I was 48. I think it's just the passion that begins to grow, and
Oh
I
yeah.
suddenly realized, you know, I know a lot of things, not in a prideful way, not in a, uh, you know,
You've
you know.
actually you actually have forgotten more than most people know.
Well, I think
That's the
it's
way.
really
That's the
helped
way it
me
is.
teaching at Liberty for the last 18 years because what it's taught me to do is to realize that wow, this guy didn't even know the ABCs. If you don't know the ABCs, you can't make a word. If you can't make a word, you can't make a sentence. You can't make a sentence, you can't do a paragraph. And it's my responsibility as an educator to be gentle, be kind, but be firm, and to uh, help grow. So I've been able to influence probably around 8 to 9,000 students in the last 18 years, and many of them call me back and talk to me, and it's really neat how God used you to plant you there. I wish somebody would give me $1 million for a church conflict chair at Liberty. That would be neat. So if you're listening to this broadcast and you would love to do that,
Well, there's plenty of money out there, brother. There's plenty of money
no,
out
no.
there, and God,
As the cat
that's not
on
a
a
problem for
thousand
God.
hills, I said, Lord, will you kill one and send it to me? And uh, uh, tell me a little bit about your wife.
Oh, my wife and I met when I was in about the 8th grade. I lived in the north side of Memphis. She lived on the south side of Memphis. Her dad was involved with politics. He was a musician. He had a moving company, but his passion was music, country music, and he had a factory with Elvis Studio in Memphis. He did lots of recording there. He had people he would bring in. They would record there. He would go to Nashville, and but they through him he organized what it was. They were like teenage civic clubs in Memphis, and his daughter Joanne was the president of the group. And there was a club on my end of town, and there was a guy who was the vice president for that group. I'd never heard of it, but he and I threw papers together. We met at an Exxon station. They dropped off our papers. We went on our paper route. So he said, "There's a girl I want you to meet." So he invited me to one of their parties on our end of town. And there's a woman who came across the room because he had connected. He talked to her, so she came over and wanted me to meet this girl. So it was at a dance. So I went across the room, and so she and I got to meet each other. And so after the party was all over, we'd stay in contact. I was going to the Catholic school, and she was going to public school, and she was a leader in her school. And um, so I was going to Christian Brothers, so I was in the middle of the city. I lived in the northeast part of the city, and she lived in the southeast, so central, east, south part of the city. But went to school in the middle part of the city, so I would catch the bus, and I would go.
Yeah, I bet you
I'd go
did.
by her house before I went home. And the day she was in a sorority there in the high school, and so we'd go to sorority kind of events, But and she had some dude that she had dated earlier. It was in some military school there in Tennessee, and I heard about it. She never really flaunted him, but I knew he was out there somewhere, and he still had interest. So, but I went to Union University after I finished the Christian Brothers, and went there for 2 years. My dad ran out of money, so I came back to Memphis State. But while I was at Union, she would. I got my first car. I was youth pastor for my home church there in Memphis. So I had a car. So I would drive back and forth. And, but we dated probably 6, 7, 8 years. And then we got married, and got married in my home church. Our pastor, we were the couple he used when he wanted to have everybody renewing their vows. We were the couple that went down the aisle, for the ceremonial event, that kind of a thing. But so she was a teacher. She
Okay.
finished a year before I did at Memphis State, and then we went to Southwestern Seminary from there, and then from there we went, but we had a couple of kids. I had 2 children, a son that's now an attorney here in Springfield, and a daughter that married an engineer who is past president of the national group of engineers and his civil engineers. He deals with the power grid, that kind of a thing. And he's given reports to Congress and given the grade of,
Yeah.
which was not very good for our national power grid situation. But that's my daughter and my son. We've got my daughter has 2 kids, one of which is also an engineer now. And then now there is a graduate of Oklahoma Baptist. And then my son has 4 kids. I've got 6 grandkids. One of those, my oldest grandson there is just finished at Duke in political science. And got another one wants to be an architect. He's going to one of the schools here in the area. But but my wife, she developed ovarian cancer. We were at the university, and um, uh, I came to a door opened here in Springfield, so I came to Springfield. My wife was still at the university, and they had approached her to be faculty senate president, but she told them no because we were about to move. So we moved here, and she developed ovarian cancer. She probably already had it. We didn't know it.
Hmm.
And so in 15, she died. But at the hospital, we had always wanted to go ahead and write our history for the kids and what we wanted to pass, what our wisdom we wanted to share with our grandkids. But we didn't expect this to happen this fast. So she was in the hospital, and we decided to go ahead and video everything. She just told her life story and what
Oh, that's
she wanted them
hmm.
to know. And but in her last week there, she went in on a Friday. And so on Monday, our kids, my daughter came, elevator full of balloons. I mean, it filled the whole elevator. So they come onto the floor with all these balloons and go into the room, and the nurses say, "What in the world is going on?" And so my wife says, "Well," she said, "I've got a birthday this week." And she says, "And I'm going to heaven." Because the doctor told her she just had hours, maybe days. So I take after they're there, and they're leaving. I'm walking back to the elevator, and so I come back, and she says, "John," she says, "I heard a voice while you were gone." And I said, "Well, what did the voice say?" Because we're not a family that hears voices, but she heard a voice. She said, "All it said was 5." She says, "Stop. I just heard the same voice again." So on Wednesday, she goes unconscious, and I sing to her and I
That's
pray
right.
with her because I know she can hear me, even though she can't respond back. And so on Friday night, and her birthday's on Saturday. I'd been in the hospital, taking baths in the hospital, so I just go home tonight and I take a bath at home. So I'm sitting in the same chair I'm sitting in right now at my desk, and I fell asleep. Well, I woke up about midnight. I said, "I got to get back to the hospital." So hospital's only about 20 blocks from where I am. So I was within 2 blocks of the hospital, I get this call, and they said, "Your wife just died." And so during that week, my kids are at Camp Kanakuk, which is, sort of a
Yeah.
national Christian camp here in Missouri. And all of our kids have been saved except for one, and that was Molly. She was the youngest granddaughter. And so we've been praying that maybe she's there with her brothers. Maybe this is her week. So I walk into the room, and there's my wife, just died. And there's a phone on her table next to her bed that is vibrating. So I pick it up, and it's a message from my
Oh,
daughter-in-law that Molly was
praise the
saved on
Lord.
Thursday.
Oh,
So I mean, what a picture! Here was, and my wife and I, we were very close. I'm a very, very, very blessed man. It was it was it was just perfect. I'm a very blessed man. So here she is. She's already gone, and we get this good news about my granddaughter. So it was perfect. But before she died, before she went unconscious on Wednesday, she said, "Now, John," she said, "you have my full permission to get married again." She says, "Don't ever question that." But she says, "You've got 20 good years left.
Wow.
Make them count." And I've used those words to encourage multiple people to know that God has a mission in their life ahead of them and not to waste them. In fact, a good friend of mine, who started a podcast, because just like what you have right now, a podcast for this area. After I shared that story with him, he said, that was the story that led my wife and I, they're from California, to start a podcast here in the area. So that's my family. My son's an attorney, and my daughter's married to an engineer here in the area.
Well, John, I really appreciate you sharing that because a lot of people are going to be able to identify. And I have a friend, he's 81, and he thought he had a lot of years left with his wife. They were married 50 something years, and she got a shoulder pain, and then within a year, she was gone. And and he just said, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't.
Yep.
But his wife said the same kind of encouragement to him. She said, "Don't worry about me. I'm gonna be in the arms of Jesus." But and he helps me with Church Health Solutions. He was the chairman of deacons at First Charlottesville when I was there for 3 years as a transitional pastor, and we became very good
Mm-hmm.
friends. In fact, they moved within a block of my house, and I said, "Well," he said, "I got 3 kids, and one of them's in Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia, I mean, and one's in Stanton, and one's here. But I actually have 2 kids here, counting you and Trish." So, so it's really been neat. But I got to walk with him through that. But he is really, um, he told me it was a couple months after that. He goes, "Look, Don, I've got to obey God. I got to keep going." And I promised my wife because she gave the same kind of encouragement about, don't waste your time, just keep going. He had to go through the grieving process and things, but he is locked in, and he
It was really strange. When my wife died, uh, the only way grief showed itself in my life, we were we were uh, we were we were ready for death. I was not a my Christians live differently and they die differently. I was a chaplain intern at the Methodist Hospital, Houston,
yes,
Baylor Medical Center. I saw a lot of death, and I'd had no deaths in my family, but I had a lot of experience with death there. But my wife and I were so connected, and death was not it was what it was. And the way it showed itself for me was, I would consult with like the National Church of the Nazarene, which was not in Kansas City where you were, but we would have the School of Large Church Management in San Diego and Orlando. Every year for 3 years, we'd attract 100 guys come in. Then we have another 100 guys come in. But San Diego was our favorite place. We loved to go to San Diego. We had certain restaurants that we went to. My biggest challenge was I could not go back to that place in San Diego. Uh, there are certain restaurants I could
yes,
not go to because they would say, "Where is your wife?" And I couldn't handle that question. So I changed my schedule, and I started, going to different new places. But outside of that, and every once in a while, talking to friends, things come back. But it never really disabled me in any way. I've got probably, I'm surrounded by 5,000 the best books and minds of the world right here. And I
Well,
work till
I can
I work
attest to
till 3 or
that
4 in the
because you
morning
texted
and
me about my
researching
email
advanced.
address at 2 in the morning. And
Yeah, and then I sleep for 8
well,
hours.
well,
But
see,
I love what I do. I really,
that's what
really
it's
do.
all about. I
And
mean that, and I have the same kind of
yeah,
relationship with my wife, and but walking through uh, the passing of one of my best friends, George, it taught us as a couple so much about when you're going through all of that. It encouraged us. It almost got us ready because one day it's going to happen to us. And I'll never forget George saying, he goes, "Look, I am not going to disappoint the Lord nor my wife because both of them are rooting for me to keep going. So I'm plugging back in." It was about a year, but he's one of the strongest guys I know. In fact,
yeah. I must tell you, my wife says now you got 20 good years. She says, and I don't expect to see you come early. You have to explain it if you do. So I tell people, I said, I'm halfway into my 20 years. I said, I've got to finish the mission because I don't have to
yeah, I
explain
mean,
to her
how
why
many
I'm
years
there.
has it been now? Okay, well, when you stop and think about that, and here's the thing I want the audience, those listening, I don't care what your age is, uh, you keep going what God's called you to do. The only person that knows your expiration date
Get that
is
right?
God. Okay. And he doesn't share that with us. But, there's challenges of getting older. But I want to tell you something. You've got a sharp mind, you got a great memory. And, and I think what happens, the old way of doing things is, you grow up, you go to, you graduate from high school, you go to college, then you get a job, then you get married, then you have this wonderful life of having children. Then at 65, you sit down. Okay, you can't do that
No, no,
because
no.
I mentioned a
Yeah,
moment
that's
ago.
the worst thing you
I
can
feel
do.
like I have so much knowledge and more experience now and more maturity that I can actually help other people. And that's why frankly, I started this podcast. You can't go everywhere, but this can reach out to everyone. But thank you for sharing that very heartwarming and okay.
Don, let me share one more thing. What you just talked, we're talking about family. Uh, we all have God stories, amazing God stories. Most of us do, and everybody has a God story. And if we don't put them down in print, we'll take them to our grave with us. Okay. And I decided, in fact, the year after my wife died, I wrote a 125-year history of our family with photos, tracking how God had been so good to us. Okay. And for Christmas, I went ahead and bought a commercial grade paper cutter. I can publish my own paperback books right here. And but I went ahead and created a book, paperback for all of my family, and had it wrapped for Christmas. And we opened when my first child opened it. I said, okay, now everybody open it at the same time because it's all the same thing. And in there, I had 10 questions. And I said, now I put money on the table. I said, now here's the deal. I said, these for the kids. I said, there are 10 questions. When you answer the 10 questions, there's money on the table. Okay. It
Yeah,
shut down the gift wrap opening at Christmas. And you would think they were
the,
taking an SAT. And I learned then not to do so. But then my son says, Dad, later on, he says, you tell these stories. He says, you need to put those down in writing. So I wrote another book called Poppy's Mostly Untold Stories. And there's about 40 stories in there. And so that was 2 Christmases later, did the same thing. But this time we did it before the meal. And but again, it's like they were. I mean, here I've got 3 college kids. I've got these others in high school. You would think they were studying for a final exam. I mean, looking for those answers, And but it's important that we tell our God story. And if you don't know how to write it, get somebody who does do it. And I just tell them, I said, just start out, get a page for every year you ever lived. Go ahead and put down your birth dates, anniversaries, what you know, and God will tell you the other things to start putting in there. And you can check with other family members before you. But then get it into a computer as soon as you can, because there'll be a lot of changes going on. And I said, but get it in print, because that's part of your heritage. And we need to protect those stories, because that's what God has done.
And
That's our
it's
book of
very
Deuteronomy.
biblical.
That's
I
our
mean,
book
that
of
all through the scripture,
Psalms.
they put stones, a memorial for this and that. And I have a 5.5-year-old grandson, and he likes rocks. And I said, okay, we got all these rocks here. What do you want to build? He said, well, in the Bible, they put stones up for different reasons. I'm thinking, okay, how do you know that?
In our family, we have collected rocks everywhere we've been, and we wrote dates and where we were, whether it's South Korea or China or North Carolina. Doesn't matter where it's been. But I have a basket here at the house full of rocks of
You
where
know,
we've been at different times
when
that
I
we just
was
picked up
at
along the way.
uh, pastoring in Florida, we I did a book of the preach through Revelation, and I got to the white stone thing where it said that God put your name down, and so I think I went to a hardware store,
Hmm.
Home Depot, Lowe's, somewhere I can't remember where, got got a huge bag of those white
Got some
landscaping
good rocks.
rocks that were medium size, put them in the bathtub, washed them all, and took them to church. And I said, is your name on the white stone? And I gave the plan of salvation and such. We had like 7 or 8 families come as families to be saved that morning. And 20 years later, I was in one of their
Wow,
homes,
wow.
and he said, hey, I want to show you my rock collection. And so he pulls out this basket. They had one on all the grandchildren. They had one on their children, and they just keep in the spouses. And he's got this huge rock collection. He put felt underneath them, and every holiday when they get together to eat, all the kids and everybody wants to get out the white stones and remember when they came to Christ. Uh, amazing thing that so many times we
Wow.
just overlook. But well, yeah, I mean, just go get
You and
some,
I are talking
get a
about
bag
very
of white
practical things here,
rocks. I
brother.
mean, we're so busy, and pastors, and we're talking to you a little bit. You know, you're so busy, you're so important. You have deliverables every week where you have to have a new sermon. But look, the first ordained uh, entity was the family. And if we don't keep our eyes on our spouse and our kids and our grandkids, uh, Billy Sunday had a good analogy on that. It does no good to win the whole world and lose your own family, and it adds excitement, uh, you know, because the church will cry and laugh when you come, and they'll cry and laugh when you go. But we have our family until God brings us
Yep.
home.
We were at a meeting at Bellevue, and remember who was the speaker for the week, but he said that there comes a time in every family when you
Yes.
have to abandon your kids to God. When you do all that you can do, and it's like the bird when it leaves the nest, and you can do the best you can do. They will make their own decisions. But I've never ever forgotten. Uh, there's Beasley Murray. That's no, not Beasley Murray. I can't think of the brother's name. But I've never forgotten that comment that he made, and it's been very instructive to pass on to other families. Sometimes, every family when they raise their kids, you can do the best you can do,
Yeah.
and some will fly and some will crash. And but we have that moment, that window that we have to protect. And I feel, I really feel for pastors that go through conflict, because where the real hurt and the
Absolutely.
damage occurs is with the wife and with the children. And that is why your ministry is so important, because they need to know that they're not alone out there, but there's people. I always told people, be careful what you say and who you criticize, because unless you're willing to pay their psychiatric bill,
Yeah, and I
you really
remember
don't want to go
when I
there.
was in Florida and we were having a garage sale, and I love garage sales. I love to pick. My daughter would take binoculars even as a little girl. It's not worth going up there, Dad. I didn't spot anything really good. Uh, you know, but I go to the Goodwill, to thrift stores, and we actually kind of pick, and it's sort of a hobby, but we'll find things that are amazing. We'll sell them for 10 times what we gave for them, and then invest that money back in. But we were doing a
That's
garage
right.
sale in Lake Mary, Florida. I'll never forget it. And a woman walked in, and she was about 80 years old, and she was looking for different things and said, "Oh, you got some books for sale. My dad was a pastor." I said, "Really?" And we had just been forced terminated out of a church of no cause of my own. It just it's a long story. Yeah,
And every
yeah.
pastor needs to
Well,
be terminated at least once. To
well,
have a heart
Adrian
for
Rogers
have a
was
heart for
fired from
those who
his
go through
first
that.
church. He said, "I think there was just a bunch of criminals there." And
Yeah,
Charles Stanley was fired from one of his first churches. I mean, I've kind of collected these stories.
yeah. Well, they almost had a fight in the floor of the church
Oh
because he had
yeah,
moved
yeah.
into the former pastor's office
And
and put
it's
something on
like,
the wall. You know.
lessons never move the pulpit because you don't know who donated it. And but what was interesting
Yeah,
is she just began to
your
talk, and
daughter.
then she
Yeah.
began to cry. I mean, not just tears, but I mean out loud in front of all these people. And my wife heard it and said, "Ma'am, what's wrong?" And she goes, "I just have such a broken heart. I seeing these books that your husband is selling reminded me of the night that my father was fired by really angry deacons, and they came to our house and told us horrible things." Now, and I said, "When did that happen?" She said, "When I was 10 years old." She carried that kind of pain
Wow.
70 years later. And it just, and I started writing some
Yeah.
things about pastors' kids. Yeah, and she just, and then she ministered to us because we were selling things to move from that location, and it was just a God thing. And I can't tell you how many
Hmm.
hundreds of PKs I have met. There's two kind of PKs. One that is that has been healed through the situation, and one that's not healed. And we actually had a ministry at Liberty University when I was residential there for PKs, and we had Bible studies and we helped them in so many different ways. But I call them the walking wounded, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of
Yep.
these individuals out there that have never healed, and they love God. They'll tell you, "I love God and I read
Yep.
the Bible and I pray," but I don't want anything to do with the church that would treat my mother and father like that.
And
Oh yeah, I mean
some
it's
become atheists and agnostics. I met one that became a university president. He taught math and physics, but
and
he
so
never
that's what I've
recovered.
spent kind of like with church growth with you. I've spent a lifetime in researching and finding things that can be helpful and ministering to people. I did have a counseling diploma, but I'm more of a coach. You know, when pastors call me, they want to be coached. Many pastors don't want to be counseled, and that's another subject we could do. They don't want to admit they need a counselor, maybe even a psychiatrist. They'll find out about me. I said, well, look, there's HIPAA. It doesn't matter. They'll find out. I can't go through the denomination. I can't call the director of missions because the churches pay them. And, there's a lot of, and so we have a lot of ways that we help. We have a psychiatrist, Christian psychiatrist, psychologist, mental health counselors that I've partnered with that know how to counsel these folks. But if you're a pastor out there and you've gone through this, you need to get into counseling. Your wife does, and your children too, where you can heal through this. Don't just take it to the next church. Love your family, and take time to heal.
Yep.
On that. But hey, well, John, we're out of time for today, but we're gonna do 2 more podcasts. But I tell you, this has been a God discussion today, and I appreciate you so much being on this podcast. And could you pray specifically for pastors and their families right now?
Father, we thank you that long before this conversation ever began, that you were already in the room. And for those who hear and for those that it communicates with, I pray that you will help each of us to know, Lord, that you love us more than we could ever begin to imagine. We know that you created us, you know our DNA, you know our thoughts, you know our pains, you know what makes us joyful. I pray that you'll bless each of these pastors and those who are listening, Lord, that they might be mighty in spirit and that they might claim the day that you've given to us, and that next 20 years you've given to all of us, Lord, plus that we'll be faithful stewards of that precious time with the people we meet and the experiences that we have, Lord, that it might be raw material for your great miracles in the lives of the people that we meet and that we know. Thank you, Jesus, for loving us and watching over us.
Amen.
Thank you for Don and this ministry. Amen.
The Church Leadership in Focus podcast is sponsored by Church Health Solutions. You may contact the host, Don Hicks, by email at don@churchhealthsolutions.com. Don welcomes ideas on church leadership topics from you that may be used in the future episodes of Church Leadership in Focus podcast. I invite you to share our link with others you know in church leadership and on your social media. Be sure to tune in for our next weekly episode. May the Lord Jesus give you wisdom and guidance as you lead and equip your church.